The $3 million kitchen had everything: German induction cooktops, satellite-connected smart refrigerators, pristine white Carrara marble imported from Italy, but it lacked one thing: life. For 23 days, that kitchen had witnessed nothing but food being thrown away. $500 organic porridge imported from America's top nutrition laboratories, protein smoothies prepared by specialists who once served Olympic athletes. All of it ended up in the trash, untouched, stone cold. Because the 4-year-old girl sitting in her custom-designed high chair had decided one thing: to follow her mother. Elena Castellano died 23 days ago, and from the moment the oak coffin lowered into the frozen Chicago earth, her daughter Lily had sealed her mouth shut like sealing a tomb. The doctors said it was a normal trauma response. Then they said it was serious. Then they shook their heads and said to prepare for the worst. Franco Castellano, the mafia boss who controlled all of South Chicago, a man whose name alone made the entire city tremble, had spent over $2 million on an in-home medical team. He brought in the best nurses from the Mayo Clinic, top child psychologists from Harvard, a chef who once cooked for the White House. None of them could make Lily open her mouth. The mafia boss could order a man killed without blinking, but he couldn't make his 4-year-old daughter swallow a single spoonful of soup. Until that afternoon. Franco came home earlier than usual. He had just walked out of a meeting with his Kappa regimes because he couldn't focus. He stepped into the kitchen looking for a glass of whiskey in a dark corner where he could scream without anyone hearing, but instead, he froze in the doorway. There was a smell. Not his wife's Chanel perfume. That scent had vanished with her into the grave. Not the harsh disinfectant the medical team used. This was mint, slow-simmered chicken broth, star-shaped pasta, the smell of cramped kitchens in poor neighborhoods where people cooked with love instead of money, the smell Elena used to secretly make for their daughter whenever Lily was sick, when Franco wasn't home, when she wanted her daughter to remember where her mother came from. Franco looked up, and his heart, the heart that had coldly ordered enemies executed, stopped beating. In the middle of the $1 million kitchen, a girl in an oversized navy blue maid's uniform was kneeling before his daughter. Not the $5,000 a day nurse, not the nutritionist with a PhD, just a cleaning woman hired that very morning, whose name he hadn't even bothered to learn. Her bright yellow rubber gloves, the kind used to scrub toilets and mop floors, were holding a cheap plastic spoon, the kind you buy at a dollar store, 10 for $1. And Lily's mouth was open. The plastic spoon went in, the tiny throat swallowed, then the cracked lips of the child, lips that had been silent for 23 endless days, moved to form one word: more. Franco Castellano, the mafia boss who made all of Chicago bow before him, the man who had never knelt to anyone, collapsed to his knees right there in the doorway of his own kitchen. Who was this girl in the yellow gloves? What had she done that a $2 million medical team couldn't? And why did the smell from that cheap pot of soup in a cracked plastic container smell exactly like the scent of the wife who now lay 6 feet underground? Franco's knees pressed against the cold marble floor, but he felt nothing. The chill that should have bitten through his tailored Italian trousers was meaningless compared to the fire burning in his chest. He tried to stand. His legs refused. 23 days of sleepless nights, of watching his daughter fade like a wilting flower, of screaming at doctors and threatening specialists, all of it had hollowed him out. He gripped the doorframe, knuckles white, and pulled himself up inch by inch, the smell wrapped around him like a ghost's embrace. Mint, chicken broth, star-shaped pasta. And suddenly, Franco was no longer standing in his $3 million kitchen. He was 3 years in the past, on a Sunday afternoon, walking into the small service kitchen that Elena had claimed as her own. She had been standing at the stove, wearing an apron over her designer dress, stirring a battered pot that looked like it belonged in a thrift store. The smell had filled the cramped space: herbs, slow-cooked, love, poverty. Franco had wrinkled his nose. "Why are you cooking cheap food? We have a chef. We have everything." Elena had turned to him, her dark eyes soft, a smile playing on her lips. "Because Lily needs to know what love tastes like, Franco, not what money tastes like." He had scoffed then. He had walked away. Now, standing in the doorway with that same scent flooding his senses, Franco would have given his entire empire to hear her say those words one more time. The memory shattered as the girl in the yellow gloves began to hum. It was a lullaby, simple, ancient, the kind passed down through generations of mothers who had nothing to give their children except their voices. Franco did not know the melody, but somewhere deep in his bones, he recognized it. And Lily, his Lily, who had been a porcelain doll with empty eyes for 23 endless days, did something miraculous. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. Not a full smile. Not yet, but movement. Life. A crack in the tomb she had sealed herself inside. Franco's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to rush forward, to scoop his daughter into his arms, to weep into her hair and beg her to stay. But his feet remained frozen to the floor, because he was afraid that if he moved, if he made a single sound, this fragile magic would shatter like glass. The girl in the yellow gloves would stop humming. Lily would close her mouth again, and the brief flicker of life would be snuffed out forever. So Franco Castellano, the man who had ordered executions without flinching, who had built an empire on blood and fear, stood paralyzed in his own kitchen, terrified of his own footsteps. The spell broke with a scream. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nurse Patricia Coleman stormed into the kitchen from the side entrance, her phone still clutched in her hand, her face twisted with professional outrage. She had seen everything through the glass door. The girl in the yellow gloves spun around, her eyes wide with terror. The plastic spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble floor. Soup splattered across the pristine white surface. Then she saw Franco. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. In her eyes, Franco saw the raw, animal fear of someone who had nothing left to lose, and was about to lose it anyway. But Franco did not look at her. He looked at Lily. His daughter was staring at the fallen spoon, her tiny hand reaching toward where the girl had been kneeling. Her lips moved, forming a word she had not spoken in 23 days. More. And for the first time since they had lowered Elena's coffin into the frozen Chicago earth, a tear rolled down Franco Castellano's cheek. To understand why that single tear weighed more than all the blood Franco Castellano had ever spilled, one must travel back 23 days to the moment when his world turned to ash. The Chicago wind that morning cut like 1,000 frozen blades. The sky hung low and gray, as if even the heavens were mourning. Oak Hill Cemetery stretched before the mourners, its headstones rising from the snow like crooked teeth. Franco stood at the edge of the grave in a black Armani suit, his face carved from granite. He did not weep. He did not tremble. The mafia boss who had buried his own father at 12 years old knew that tears were a luxury the powerful could not afford. Beside him, Lily clutched her mother's silk scarf, the pale blue one that still carried the faint ghost of Chanel perfume. Her small fingers twisted the fabric so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She stared at the oak coffin as it hovered over the frozen earth, her dark eyes unblinking, uncomprehending. The priest spoke words that Franco did not hear. The coffin began to descend. And Lily did not cry. She simply switched off, like a light bulb burning out. One moment, there was a 4-year-old girl standing beside her father. The next moment, there was only a shell breathing, blinking, but hollow. Franco noticed, but he did not understand. Not yet. The first 3 days, he told himself it was shock. Children process grief differently, the psychologist had said. Give her time. She will come around. On day 4, Lily refused breakfast. The nanny tried oatmeal, pancakes, her favorite strawberry yogurt. Lily turned her head away and stared at the wall. On day 7, she stopped drinking water. Her lips cracked. Her skin grew pale. Franco fired the nanny and hired 3 more. On day 10, Dr. Harrison Webb, the family physician who had treated 3 generations of Castellanos, inserted an IV line into Lily's tiny arm. Fluids dripped into her veins while she lay motionless on her princess bed, surrounded by stuffed animals that no longer made her smile. Day 14, day 17, day 20. Franco threw money at the problem like gasoline on a fire. He flew in pediatric specialists from Johns Hopkins. He hired nutritionists, therapists, hypnotists. He bought every toy imaginable, transformed her room into a wonderland, promised her ponies and castles and anything her heart desired. Lily did not even blink. On day 22, Dr. Webb pulled Franco aside. The old doctor's face was gray with exhaustion and something worse, defeat. Her body is refusing to live, Mr. Castellano. This is no longer a medical issue. This is something else. Franco grabbed the doctor by his lapels, lifting him off his feet. I will pay you $10 million to save my daughter. Name your price. Anything. Dr. Webb looked at him with eyes full of sorrow. There are things money cannot buy, sir, and your daughter's will to live is one of them. That night, Franco stood outside Lily's door. The hallway was dark. The mansion was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside her bed. He pressed his forehead against the cold wood and whispered into the darkness. Elena, are you taking her with you? Are you leaving me with nothing? No answer came, only the steady beep of the monitor, counting down the remaining heartbeats of his daughter's life. Franco Castellano was not an ordinary man. and the empire he commanded was anything but ordinary. The Castellano mansion sat atop Gold Coast Hill, like a crown overlooking its kingdom. 30 rooms spread across 4 floors, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gazed down upon Lake Michigan's endless gray waters. The architecture was a fortress disguised as luxury, reinforced concrete behind the Italian marble, bulletproof glass in every window. A bomb shelter buried 3 stories beneath the wine cellar. 20 armed guards patrolled the grounds in rotating shifts. Surveillance cameras covered every inch of the property, feeding into a control room that operated around the clock. Motion sensors lined the perimeter. Panic buttons hid beneath every table. This was the throne room of South Chicago's underworld. For 15 years, Franco had ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Gambling operations, loan sharking, protection rackets, every illegal dollar that flowed through the southern half of the city passed through his hands. Rival families had tried to challenge him. They now resided in unmarked graves or at the bottom of Lake Michigan. But empires, like men, could crumble from within. Since Elena's death, Franco had abandoned his throne. Meetings went unattended. Phone calls went unanswered. The constant stream of capos and lieutenants seeking audience dried up as word spread the boss was unreachable. Vincent Moretti, Franco's most trusted soldier for over 20 years, stood in the study doorway one evening, his weathered face creased with concern. "Boss, the Irish are moving on the north side. They've taken over 3 of our gambling dens. The Russians are circling too. They smell blood." Franco sat in his leather chair, staring at the security monitor that showed Lily's room. His daughter lay motionless in her bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, keeping her alive by force. "Let them take it," Franco said, his voice hollow. Vincent stepped forward. "Boss, if we don't respond, they'll think we're weak. 15 years of work," I said, "let them take it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In 15 years, Franco Castellano had never retreated. He had never shown weakness. He had never let an insult go unanswered. But what was an empire worth without an heir? Each night, Franco stood outside Lily's door, unable to enter. He would press his palm against the wood, feeling the faint vibrations of the medical equipment inside, listening to the rhythmic beeping that confirmed his daughter still breathed. He was afraid to go in, afraid that if he opened that door, he would find her gone, that the machines would be screaming their alarms while nurses scrambled uselessly around a body that had already surrendered. So he stood in the darkness and did something he had not done since he was 12 years old, since the night he watched his father bleed out on a warehouse floor. He prayed, "God, if you're listening, please, take anything, take everything. Just leave me my daughter." The answer came on day 22, but not from God. The heart monitor shrieked. The alarm pierced through the mansion like a knife. Franco burst through the door, nearly ripping it from its hinges, screaming for Dr. Webb, for the nurses, for anyone. Lily's small body convulsed once, twice, then lay still. 30 seconds of chest compressions, 30 seconds of Franco's world collapsing, 30 seconds of bargaining with every deity he had ever cursed, then a heartbeat. "Doctor." Webb wiped sweat from his brow, his hands trembling. "She's stable. For now." He turned to Franco, his eyes filled with the weight of a truth he did not want to speak. "You have a week, Mr. Castellano, maybe less." "She's letting go." Franco sank to his knees beside his daughter's bed. He took her tiny hand in his, so small, so fragile, so cold, and pressed it to his lips. "I will do anything," he whispered. "Whatever it takes. Whatever the cost." He did not know that the answer to his prayer was, at that very moment, counting her last coins in a crumbling apartment on the south side, 45 minutes south of the Castellano mansion, in a world that might as well have existed on another planet. A young woman sat on a sagging mattress counting coins. Aurora Hayes spread the change across the stained bedsheet: 3 quarters, 4 dimes, 7 pennies, $1.22, the sum total of everything she owned in the world. The room around her measured barely 15 square meters. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls like varicose veins. A water stain bloomed across the ceiling where the roof leaked every time it rained. Cockroaches scuttled in the corners, no longer bothering to hide. The radiator had stopped working 2 winters ago, and the landlord had stopped pretending he would fix it. This was home. On the narrow bed against the opposite wall, an elderly woman sat propped against flat pillows, her eyes clouded with the fog of Alzheimer's. Martha Hayes was 82 years old, though her mind had retreated somewhere far younger. She stared at Aurora with a confused smile. "Sarah? Is that you, Sarah? Did you bring my medicine?" Aurora's heart clenched. Sarah had been her mother's name. Sarah had been dead for 12 years. "It's me, Grandma. It's Aurora." Martha's smile faltered, then returned, vacant. Sarah, you always were a good girl. Your father will be home soon. Aurora looked at the coins in her hand, then at the prescription bottle on the nightstand empty since yesterday. Her grandmother's Alzheimer medication cost $47 for a 2-week supply. The cheapest groceries she could find would run at least $15 for the week, $1.22. Medicine or food, never both. The choice tore at her, just as it did every month, every week, every day. But there was no choice, really. There never was. 6 months ago, Aurora had believed life could not get worse. She had been wrong. The memory surfaced unbidden, the cold linoleum floor of the free clinic, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the blood pooling between her legs. The loan sharks her ex-husband had borrowed from had found her. They had made their point with their fists and their boots while she screamed for help that never came. When she regained consciousness, the doctor's face told her everything. 5 months pregnant, a baby she had already named in secret, whispered to in the dark, promised a better life than her own, gone. Aurora had not cried that night. She had not cried since. There were no tears left. A knock on the door startled her from the memory. She opened it to find a woman in a cheap blazer, clutching a clipboard. The employment agency logo was peeling off her folder. Aurora Hayes? I have a position. Live-in domestic help. One of those big mansions up north. The pay is... The woman checked her notes. Very good, actually. 3 times the normal rate. Aurora's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? The woman hesitated. The employer is... Well, his name is Franco Castellano. The name landed like a stone in still water. Everyone on the south side knew that name, knew what it meant, knew the bodies buried beneath it. The mafia boss? They prefer businessman. The woman shrugged. Look, I'm required to tell you. What you do with the information is your choice. Aurora looked back at her grandmother, who was now humming a lullaby to an invisible child. She looked at the empty medicine bottle, at the stack of overdue bills stuffed in a drawer, at the eviction notice pinned to the wall. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. After the woman left, Aurora knelt beside her bed and pulled out a small wooden box hidden beneath the loose floorboard. Inside lay a photograph, its edges worn soft from years of handling. 2 girls smiled in the summer sunshine, one dark-haired, one light, cousins, best friends, sisters in everything but blood. On the back, in a child's messy handwriting, Aurora, I'll always be here for you. Elena Castellano, Elena Reyes, as she had been then, before she married into money and power, and a world that Aurora could never enter. Elena, who had sent secret letters and hidden money. Elena, who had never forgotten where she came from. Elena, who had been buried 23 days ago. Aurora pressed the photograph to her chest and whispered into the empty room. I'm coming, sister. I'm sorry I'm too late. Aurora arrived at the Castellano estate through the servants' gate, a narrow entrance hidden behind a wall of perfectly trimmed hedges, invisible to anyone approaching from the main driveway. The gate itself was designed to be forgotten, just like the people who passed through it. She stepped onto the grounds and stopped breathing. The mansion rose before her like a palace from another century. 3 stories of white stone and gleaming windows stretched toward the gray Chicago sky. The front lawn alone was larger than the entire block where she lived. Fountains carved from Italian marble stood silent in the winter air. Their waters drained until spring. Her cramped apartment could have fit inside this place 100 times over, maybe more. A woman in a crisp black dress emerged from a side door. Her silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She carried a clipboard and wore an expression that suggested she had already found Aurora lacking. You are the new girl from the agency. It was not a question. I am Mrs. Irene Crawford, head housekeeper. You will address me as Mrs. Crawford, nothing else. Aurora nodded. Yes, Mrs. Crawford. The woman circled her slowly, inspecting her like livestock at an auction. She seized Aurora's hands without warning, turning them over to examine her palms, her fingers, her nails. Fingernails trimmed? Any infectious diseases? Criminal record? No, ma'am. None of those. Mrs. Crawford made a note on her clipboard, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval, though what exactly she disapproved of, Aurora could not tell. Perhaps everything. Follow me. The interior of the mansion stole what remained of Aurora's breath. The floors were polished marble, so pristine she could see her own reflection staring back at her, a ghost in worn shoes and second-hand clothes, impossibly out of place in this temple of wealth. But beneath the grandeur, something was wrong. The air hung heavy and cold, thick with a silence that pressed against Aurora's ears. No voices echoed through the halls, no footsteps, no life. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum, beautiful on the outside, filled with death within. Mrs. Crawford led her to a small room off the service corridor and handed her a navy blue uniform, slightly too large, and a pair of bright yellow rubber gloves. "The rules, Mrs. Crawford said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Do not make eye contact with Mr. Castellano. Do not speak unless spoken to. If you see him approaching, disappear. Find a closet, a corner, another room, I do not care where. Just vanish." Aurora nodded silently. "And most importantly, Mrs." Crawford stepped closer, her eyes boring into Aurora's. "Under no circumstances are you to approach the east wing. That is where the child's room is. You are not to go near it. You are not to look at it. You are not to even think about it. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mrs. Crawford." The older woman studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign of defiance. Finding none, she nodded curtly. "Your duties today: scrub the guest bathrooms, mop the service corridors, polish the windows in the kitchen. Begin immediately." Aurora changed into her uniform in a storage closet that smelled of bleach and forgotten things. The fabric hung loose on her thin frame, and the yellow gloves squeaked against her skin. She caught her reflection in a dusty mirror propped against the wall. She looked like no one, like nothing. Good. She was used to that. Hours passed in a blur of scrubbing and polishing. Aurora worked in silence, invisible to the few staff members who passed her without a glance. She had nearly finished mopping the east corridor when she heard it. Beeping, the rhythmic, mechanical beeping of medical equipment. It came from behind a closed door at the end of the hallway, the forbidden east wing. Aurora's hands tightened on the mop handle. Then voices. 2 nurses, speaking in hushed tones just around the corner. "She hasn't cried in 3 days now. That's not good. That's not good at all. I know. When children stop crying, it means they've given up." Aurora's heart seized in her chest. She thought of her own child, the one who had never drawn breath, never opened its eyes, never cried its first cry. The one she had lost on a cold hospital floor while strangers stepped over her bleeding body. Her baby had not cried either, because some goodbyes happen in silence. The collision Aurora had been warned about came just 3 hours into her first day. She was on her knees in the main foyer, scrubbing the marble floor with a brush that had seen better days. The bucket of soapy water sat beside her, gray with the dirt she had already lifted from the stone. Her back ached, her knees throbbed, but she kept working, invisible, silent, just as she had been taught. The front door exploded open. Franco Castellano stormed through like a hurricane given human form. His face was carved from granite, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles pulsed beneath his skin. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, rimmed with shadows so dark they looked like bruises. He had just come from another meeting with Dr. Webb, another round of bad news, another countdown to the inevitable. Aurora saw him too late. She scrambled to gather her supplies, to vanish as Mrs. Crawford had commanded. But her hands moved too slowly, her legs responded too late. Franco's Italian leather shoe, handcrafted, worth $5,000, caught the edge of her bucket. Water splashed across the pristine marble. Droplets sprayed onto his shoes, darkening the leather like spreading wounds. The silence that followed was absolute. Franco stopped mid-stride. He looked down at his ruined shoes. Then his gaze traveled to Aurora, still frozen on her knees, her brush clutched in white-knuckled fingers. He looked at her the way one might look at a cockroach scuttling across a dinner plate. "Who let you in here?" His voice was quiet, controlled. Somehow, that made it more terrifying than any shout. Aurora's mouth opened, but only a strangled whisper emerged. I'm sorry, sir. I'm new. I didn't see Mrs. Crawford." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Within seconds, the head housekeeper materialized from a side corridor, her face pale. "Mr. Castellano, I apologize. She only started this morning." Franco held up a hand. "Mrs. Crawford fell silent. "Teach her the rules," he said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. "And get her different shoes. The sound of cheap rubber on my floors is like fingernails on a chalkboard." He turned to leave, and Aurora allowed herself a small breath of relief. Then he paused. "And Mrs. Crawford?" He did not look back. "Keep her away from Lily. I will not have my daughter exposed to the smell of poverty that people like this carry with them from the streets." The words landed like a slap. Aurora stayed motionless, her eyes fixed on the wet floor, as Franco's footsteps faded into the depths of the mansion. She heard a door slam somewhere far away. Then silence. Mrs. Crawford stood over her, disappointment radiating from every line of her rigid posture. Clean this up, then report to the service quarters for reassignment. The housekeeper disappeared, leaving Aurora alone with the dirty water and the sting of humiliation. Slowly, Aurora raised her head. She stared at the hallway where Franco had vanished, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She had been called worse things in her life. She had been treated worse, but something about his casual cruelty, the effortless way he had dismissed her existence, cut deeper than she expected. And yet, in her memory, Elena's voice whispered from a letter written years ago, words Aurora had read so many times she knew them by heart. Franco has a good heart. It's just buried too deep. Aurora swallowed her tears and picked up her brush. How deep was too deep? And was there anything left beneath all that ice worth digging for? 3 a.m. The servants' quarters lay wrapped in darkness, but Aurora could not find sleep. The mattress beneath her was thin and hard. The room felt like an icebox. The heating system apparently did not extend to this forgotten corner of the mansion. She lay curled beneath a blanket that smelled of mothballs, staring at the ceiling. She needed to move, to breathe. Aurora slipped out of bed and cursed into the hallway. The mansion at night was a different creature, shadows pooled in corners. Moonlight sliced through tall windows, and every creak sounded like a whisper from the grave. Then she heard it, not the mechanical beeping of monitors. This was something else, singing. The voice was rough and broken, cracking on every note. It carried no melody, only raw desperation wrapped in sound. Aurora followed it toward the forbidden east wing. The door stood slightly ajar, dim light spilling into the hallway. She peered through the gap. Franco Castellano sat hunched beside his daughter's bed, his broad shoulders curved inward, his spine bent like an old man crushed by grief. The powerful mafia boss who had dismissed her like garbage now looked like an emptied vessel. He was singing a lullaby. The words came out mangled, the tune unrecognizable. He clearly did not know the song, had perhaps never sung to his daughter before Elena died, but he was trying. Lily lay motionless, her small body barely raising the blankets. Her skin stretched thin over bones no child should show. In her tiny fist, she clutched a silk scarf, pale blue, with an elegant letter E embroidered in the corner. Elena's scarf. Franco's voice crumbled into silence. He pressed his lips to his daughter's forehead. "Don't leave me, Lily." His whisper carried through the gap. "Daddy cannot survive without you." His voice trembled like a child afraid of the dark. Aurora stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth to trap the sob rising in her throat. This was not a monster. This was a father watching his child die. She fled to her room, tears streaming down her cheeks. She understood this pain. 6 months ago, she had sung lullabies too, not to a child in a bed, but to a swelling belly that held all her hopes. Then came the blood, then the silence where a heartbeat should have been. Franco Castellano was losing his daughter. Aurora had already lost hers, and in that shared grief, something invisible cracked open between them. Day 23, late afternoon. Aurora had been assigned to clean the kitchen windows, the same kitchen where everything was about to change. She stood on a stepladder, yellow rubber gloves squeaking against the glass as she wiped in slow circles. Below her, a scene played out that she was supposed to ignore. Nurse Patricia Coleman sat before Lily's high chair, holding a spoon loaded with gray nutritional paste. The child sat motionless, a wax figure with hollow eyes that stared at nothing. The medical equipment surrounding her beeped its steady countdown. "Lily, you need to eat." Patricia's voice held no warmth, only professional frustration. "If you don't eat, we'll have to put the tube back in. You remember the tube, don't you? It hurts." Lily did not blink, did not move, did not acknowledge that anyone had spoken. Patricia tried again, pushing the spoon toward the child's sealed lips. The paste smeared across Lily's mouth, untasted, unwanted. The nurse wiped it away with mechanical efficiency. "Fine, have it your way." Patricia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, then at the child, then at her phone again. With a heavy sigh, she set down the spoon and stood. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere." The joke fell flat in the empty kitchen. Patricia walked out through the side door, already lifting the phone to her ear. Aurora's hands stopped moving against the glass. She looked down at Lily, truly looked, for the first time since entering this house. The child was skeletal, her skin stretched tight over bones that jutted at unnatural angles. Her dark hair hung limp and lifeless. Her eyes, once bright according to the photographs Aurora had glimpsed throughout the mansion, were now dull as stones. Then Aurora saw it. A single tear rolled down Lily's pale cheek, silent, unwiped. The child did not sob, did not sniffle, did not make any sound at all. Just that one tear, tracking a wet line through the paste residue on her skin. a tear without a voice. Aurora's chest tightened, her vision blurred. 6 months ago, she had lain on a hospital floor, bleeding, alone, invisible to the people stepping around her body. No one had stopped, no one had cared. She had lost everything in silence, surrounded by strangers who saw nothing worth saving. She looked at the security camera blinking red in the corner. She looked at the door Patricia had walked through. She looked at the child dying by inches in her high chair. Aurora climbed down from the ladder. Her hands moved before her mind could stop them. She walked to her bag, tucked into a corner of the service area, and pulled out a plastic container. Inside was her lunch chicken soup with star-shaped pasta and fresh mint. Her grandmother's recipe, the same recipe she and Elena had learned together as children, standing on tiptoes in a cramped kitchen that smelled of love instead of money. Aurora knew what would happen if she got caught. Missus. Crawford would fire her instantly. She would lose her income, her grandmother's medicine, everything. She looked at Lily again. The child sat frozen, that single tear still glistening on her cheek, waiting for no one. Aurora had watched one child slip away in silence. Her own child, the one she never got to hold. She could not watch another. Not again. Not ever again. She opened the container, and the scent of mint and chicken broth filled the cold kitchen like a prayer. Franco remained on his knees, tears streaming down his face unchecked. The most feared man in Chicago knelt on his own marble floor, weeping like a child, unable to tear his eyes from his daughter. Aurora stood frozen beside Lily's high chair, the plastic spoon still dripping soup onto the pristine floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, to become invisible as she had been trained. But her legs refused to move. The side door burst open. Nurse Patricia stormed back into the kitchen, phone still clutched in her hand. She took in the scene, Franco on his knees, Aurora standing over the child, the strange soup, the fallen spoon, and her face contorted with professional outrage. "Mr. Castellano?" Patricia's voice sliced through the air. "This woman has been feeding your daughter something unauthorized. I have no idea what's in that container. It could be contaminated. It could be poisonous." Franco's tears stopped. His jaw tightened. He rose slowly to his feet, unfolding like a storm gathering strength. Aurora's blood turned to ice. This was it, the explosion she had been dreading, the fury of a mafia boss directed at a nobody who had dared to touch his dying daughter. Franco walked toward her. Each footstep echoed like a gunshot. Aurora retreated until her back pressed against the cold steel of the refrigerator. She lowered her eyes, bracing for the blow, physical or verbal. She did not know which would come first. But Franco did not look at her. He looked past her, at Lily. The child was doing something she had not done since the day they buried her mother. Her tiny arm stretched outward, fingers reaching toward Aurora, grasping at empty air. More. The word escaped Lily's cracked lips, barely louder than a breath. "Please." Franco stopped breathing. That voice, that small, fragile voice he had convinced himself he would never hear again. The voice that had been silent for 23 days, sealed behind grief too vast for a 4-year-old to comprehend. His daughter had spoken. Slowly, Franco turned to Aurora. His eyes red-rimmed, exhausted. Haunted studied her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Where did you get this recipe?" Aurora's voice trembled. "It was my grandmother's, sir. Your grandmother." Franco's gaze sharpened. "Where was she from?" "West Side, sir. We grew up there." The words landed like stones in still water. West Side. The neighborhood where Elena had been born. The streets she had walked before money and marriage lifted her into a world of marble floors and designer gowns. Franco stared at Aurora for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, suspicion giving way to desperate calculation. He turned to Mrs. Crawford, who had materialized in the doorway, her face pale with confusion. "This woman stays," Franco said. His voice left no room for argument. "From now on, she has one job and one job only, taking care of Lily." Patricia's mouth fell open. "Mr. Castellano, this is highly irregular. I must protest. You're fired." Franco did not even glance at her. "Collect your things and leave." "Missus." Crawford stepped forward. "Sir, are you certain?" "She's just a cleaning girl. I said she stays." Silence swallowed the kitchen. Aurora stood motionless, unable to process what had just happened. Minutes ago, she had been scrubbing windows, invisible, worthless. Now the most powerful man in Chicago was entrusting her with his daughter's life. Then Lily did something that made everyone freeze. She smiled, small, fragile, barely a curve of her pale lips, but real, the first smile in 23 days. In the days that followed, the Castellano mansion began to transform slowly, imperceptibly, like ice melting beneath a winter sun. Aurora's first act of rebellion was opening the curtains. Heavy velvet drapes had shrouded Lily's room since the funeral, sealing out the world, trapping grief inside like smoke in a bottle. Aurora pulled them apart, and golden afternoon light flooded the space for the first time in nearly a month. Mrs. Crawford nearly had a heart attack when she saw wildflowers stuffed into a water glass on Lily's nightstand, common daisies and dandelions plucked from the garden's edge, their cheerful yellow heads nodding beside machines that monitored heartbeats and oxygen levels. "Those weeds will attract insects," the housekeeper protested. Aurora smiled politely and did not remove them. Every day, she cooked the same simple soup, chicken broth simmered, low and slow, star-shaped pasta, fresh mint from a plant she had requested for the kitchen windowsill. Every day, she sang the old lullabies her grandmother had taught her, the same songs Elena had known, melodies carried across generations of women who had nothing to give but love. Lily began to return. On the first day, she ate half a bowl. Her eyes followed Aurora's movements, tracking the spoon from pot to mouth. By day 3, color had crept back into her cheeks, faint pink shadows where gray pallor had lived for weeks. On day 5, she spoke a complete sentence. "Aurora, tell me a story." Aurora told her about 2 little girls who grew up together on the west side, who caught fireflies in mason jars and dreamed of castles far away. She did not say the other girl's name. She did not need to. Franco watched it all. In his study, multiple monitors displayed security footage from throughout the mansion, but his eyes remained fixed on one screen, the feed from Lily's room. He watched Aurora sit cross-legged on the floor, building pillow fortresses with his daughter. He watched Lily laugh, actually laugh, the sound tinny through the speakers but unmistakable, a sound he had been certain died with Elena. Franco wanted to go to them, wanted to push open that door, to kneel beside his daughter, to become part of whatever magic Aurora had woven, but his feet would not move. Something held him back, pride perhaps, or fear, or the growing awareness of an emotion he did not want to name: jealousy. He was jealous of a cleaning woman, jealous of the ease with which she had reached his daughter when all his money and power had failed. That night, Franco stood outside Lily's door as he had done so many times before. But this time, instead of silence and beeping monitors, he heard singing. Aurora's voice drifted through the wood, soft and warm, wrapping around an old lullaby. Lily was already asleep. He could hear her steady breathing beneath the song. For a moment, Franco allowed himself to lean against the doorframe and simply listen. Then footsteps approached from the hallway. Vincent appeared, his face grim. "Boss, you have a visitor. Margaret Whitmore is waiting in the main hall." Franco's expression darkened instantly. Margaret, Elena's mother, the woman who had never approved of her daughter's poor relations, who had spent years trying to scrub away every trace of Elena's humble origins. She never visited without a purpose, and her purposes were never good. Margaret Whitmore entered the Castellano mansion as though she owned it. At 62 years old, she remained impeccably preserved platinum blonde hair cropped in a razor-sharp bob, a Chanel suit that cost more than most people earned in a month, South Sea pearls draped across her collarbone like a declaration of war. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the precision of a metronome, each step announcing her superiority. "The security here has become absurd," she declared before Franco could speak. "I was kept waiting at the gate for 7 minutes. 7 minutes, Franco. And no one thought to inform me that my own granddaughter had recovered enough to receive visitors." Franco's jaw tightened. "I wasn't aware you were coming, Margaret. A grandmother shouldn't need an appointment to see her grandchild." Her eyes swept across the foyer, cataloging every detail, searching for flaws. "I heard through certain channels that Lily has improved. I want to see her. Now." Franco considered refusing. Every instinct told him this visit would bring trouble. But Margaret was Elena's mother, and despite everything, she had legal standing as Lily's grandmother. "Follow me," he said flatly. They ascended the grand staircase in silence, Margaret's perfume trailing behind her like a toxic cloud. Franco led her down the east wing corridor, toward the room that had been a tomb just days ago. He opened the door. The scene inside stopped Margaret mid-step. Aurora sat cross-legged on the carpet, her hair loose and tangled, her uniform smeared with watercolor paints. She had her hands raised like claws, her face scrunched into a mock ferocious expression, growling playfully. And Lily was laughing. The sound rang through the room like bells, pure and crystalline, the laugh of a child who had forgotten that death existed. She clutched a stuffed rabbit in one hand while the other reached toward Aurora, begging for more. "The monster's going to get you," Aurora roared, crawling forward on her knees. Lily shrieked with delight and tumbled backward onto a pile of pillows. Margaret's face twisted, not with joy, not with relief, with disgust. "What is this?" Her voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Why is there a servant touching my granddaughter?" The room went silent. Aurora scrambled to her feet, smoothing her stained uniform, lowering her eyes. "Ma'am, I wasn't speaking to you." Margaret did not even glance at her. "Franco, explain this immediately." Lily had stopped laughing. She looked at her grandmother with wide, uncertain eyes, then slowly backed away until she stood behind Aurora's legs, her small fingers clutching the fabric of the maid's uniform. She did not run to her grandmother. She hid from her. Margaret saw it. The rejection landed like a slap across her perfectly powdered face. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. "Franco, my study. Now." She turned and swept from the room, leaving Frost in her wake. In the study, with the door closed and the air thick with tension, Margaret launched her assault. "You hired some peasant girl to care for my granddaughter? A child who carries Whitmore blood? Do you have any idea who this woman is? Have you run a background check? Verified her credentials?" Franco stood by the window, staring out at the gray Chicago skyline. He said nothing, because the truth was, he had not checked. He had not asked questions. He had simply watched his daughter eat for the first time in 23 days and made a decision with his heart instead of his head. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I see. Then allow me to investigate on your behalf." The next morning, at Margaret's insistence, Franco summoned Vincent to his study. The oak-paneled room felt smaller than usual, cramped by tension. Margaret sat in a leather armchair like a queen awaiting tribute, her manicured fingers drumming against the armrest. Franco stood by the window, his back to the room, watching clouds gather over Lake Michigan. Vincent entered with a manila folder tucked under his arm. "You have the information?" Margaret asked before Franco could speak. Vincent glanced at his boss, received a curt nod, and opened the file. Aurora Hayes, 28 years old, born and raised on the west side of Chicago. He flipped a page. Father died when she was 5, heart attack, caused by overwork at the meatpacking plant. Mother remarried 2 years later to a man named Dale Simmons. Simmons had a record drunk and disorderly, domestic violence, petty theft. Margaret's lips curled with satisfaction. "Continue." "Mother died of cancer when Aurora was 16. No money for treatment." Vincent paused, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "The girl ran away from her stepfather that same year. Lived on the streets for a while. Worked odd jobs, waitressing, cleaning, factory work. Whatever she could find." Franco remained motionless at the window, but his shoulders had grown rigid. She married at 24. Husband's name was Derek Cole. Cole was a gambler with connections to the Southside loan sharks. He racked up $50,000 in debt, then disappeared, left her holding the bill. Margaret leaned forward. "So she owes money to criminals. How delightful." Vincent's jaw tightened. "There's more. 6 months ago, the loan sharks found her. They beat her badly. She was pregnant at the time, 5 months along. She lost the baby." Silence crashed through the room. Even Margaret had nothing to say. Vincent closed the folder. "Currently, she's the sole caretaker for her grandmother, Martha Hayes, age 82. Advanced Alzheimer's. The old woman's medication costs nearly all of Aurora's income. She's behind on rent, behind on bills, behind on everything." Margaret recovered first. Her voice dripped with venom. "You see, Franco? Debt. Criminals. A woman with nothing to lose. Who knows what she really wants from your family? From your fortune?" Franco finally turned from the window. His face betrayed nothing, a mask carved from stone. But behind his eyes, something churned. He remembered another woman from the west side. A woman who had worked as a waitress when he met her, who had worn second-hand dresses and dreamed of a life beyond poverty. A woman Margaret had despised from the moment Elena brought her home. His wife, the love of his life, the mother of his child. "Does she have a criminal record?" Franco asked quietly. Vincent shook his head. "Clean. Not even a parking ticket. She's just..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "She's just someone who caught a lot of bad breaks." Franco walked to his desk and sat down heavily. He steepled his fingers beneath his chin, staring at a photograph of Elena that watched over the room. "Aurora stays," he said. "This is my decision." Margaret rose to her feet, her face flushed with fury. "You will regret this, Franco. Mark my words." She swept toward the door, yanking it open with more force than necessary. In the hallway beyond, Aurora was walking hand in hand with Lily, leading her toward the garden. The child was chattering happily, pointing at something through the window. Margaret paused, her eyes fixed on the pair, the peasant girl and the Whitmore heir, bonded like mother and daughter. A smile crept across her face. Cold, calculated, cruel. The plan had already begun forming in her mind. The 3 days Margaret stayed at the mansion were 3 days of calculated torture for Aurora. It began with small cruelties. Margaret wrinkled her nose when Aurora brought Lily's soup to the table. "What is that smell? It reeks of poverty. Can't you cook anything that doesn't remind me of a homeless shelter?" Aurora said nothing. She simply took the bowl back to the kitchen and brought a fresh one, identical to the first. At dinner, Margaret insisted Aurora stand behind her chair like a Victorian servant, refilling her water glass, fetching napkins, enduring her endless complaints. The older woman never used Aurora's name, only that woman, or the help, or simply a dismissive wave of her jeweled hand. Aurora endured it all, for Lily. But what infuriated Margaret most was something she could not control. Lily refused to leave Aurora's side. When Margaret reached for the child, Lily shrank away. When Margaret offered expensive toys and promises of shopping trips, Lily shook her head and pressed closer to Aurora's legs. When Margaret tried to read her a bedtime story, Lily asked for Aurora instead. The rejection burned in Margaret's chest like acid. On the 3rd day, she executed her plan. "You there." Margaret gestured at Aurora from the sitting room. "Come help me. The clasp on my necklace is stuck." Aurora approached cautiously. The South Sea pearl necklace glowed against Margaret's throat, a rope of luminous spheres worth more than Aurora would earn in 10 lifetimes. "Turn around," Aurora said softly. "I'll try to undo it." Her fingers worked at the delicate clasp. After a moment, it released. "There, it's open." Margaret lifted the necklace away, examining it briefly. "Fine, you may go." Aurora returned to Lily, who was drawing pictures at the small table by the window. She thought nothing more of it. 15 minutes later, a scream shattered the silence. "My necklace!" Margaret's voice echoed through the mansion like a siren. Staff members came running from every direction. Franco emerged from his study, his face dark with concern. "It's gone." Margaret stood in the center of the main hall, her hand pressed to her bare throat. "My South Sea pearl necklace. $200,000. Someone has stolen it." Her eyes swept the assembled staff, then locked onto Aurora with laser precision. "She was the last one to touch me. Search her." Aurora's blood turned to ice. "I didn't. Search her now, Mrs." Crawford stepped forward, her face grim. "Miss Hayes, please empty your pockets." Aurora's hands trembled as she reached into her apron pocket, the same apron she had been wearing all morning. The same pocket that had held nothing but a spare handkerchief and Lily's hair ribbon. Her fingers touched something cold and round. She pulled it out. The South Sea pearls cascaded from her pocket, catching the light. Impossibly beautiful, impossibly damning. Mrs. Crawford gasped. Margaret's face contorted with triumph. "There, you see? A thief. I knew it from the moment I saw her." Aurora stared at the necklace in her hand. She had not taken it. She had not even touched it after removing it from Margaret's neck. But none of that mattered now. She looked at Franco, searching his face for the man who had wept in the kitchen doorway, the man who had trusted her with his daughter's life. His eyes met hers, cold, hard, unreadable, steel where warmth had been. Franco walked toward Aurora, each footstep striking the marble like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. His eyes moved from the pearls dangling in her trembling hand to her face pale, terrified, pleading then to Margaret, who dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, performing grief she did not feel. A war raged inside his skull. Logic screamed at him. The evidence was clear. The necklace had been found in her pocket. She had debt. She had motive. The dossier Vincent had compiled painted a portrait of desperation, a woman drowning who might grasp at anything to survive. But something else whispered beneath the noise. Something quieter. Something that remembered the way Aurora had knelt before his daughter, singing lullabies that smelled of mint and miracles. Margaret's voice shattered his hesitation. "Call the police, Franco. This woman is a criminal. She should rot in prison for what she's done." Franco's jaw tightened. Scandal. Headlines. The Castellano name dragged through tabloids. His enemies would feast on the chaos. "No police," he said. His voice was flat, dead. "I won't have reporters crawling over my property." He turned to Aurora. Their eyes met his shuttered and cold, hers brimming with desperate hope. "You have 5 minutes to leave this house." The words landed like stones thrown at glass. "Sir, please." Aurora stepped forward, her voice breaking. "I didn't take it. I swear on my life. I would never. I trusted you once." Franco's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "I gave you my daughter, and you repaid me with betrayal." "I didn't. 5 minutes. Starting now." Aurora stood frozen, the pearls still clutched in her hand. Mrs. Crawford stepped forward and plucked them from her fingers, handling them like sacred relics defiled by common touch. Slowly, Aurora untied her apron. She folded it neatly, a final act of dignity in the face of destruction, and set it on the marble table. She walked toward the front door. Then a scream tore through the mansion. "Aurora! No!" Lily appeared at the top of the grand staircase, barefoot, her face streaked with tears. She had heard everything through the vents that carried sound throughout the old house. The child flew down the stairs, nearly tripping, her small legs pumping frantically. She crashed into Aurora's legs, wrapping her arms around them with desperate strength. "Don't go. Mommy, don't go." Aurora stopped breathing. "Mommy," the word hung in the air like a prayer and a curse. Franco stared at his daughter who had not called anyone mommy since Elena died, clinging to the cleaning woman like she was the last solid thing in a dissolving world. His heart cracked, shattered, fell to pieces on the marble floor. Margaret seized the moment. "You see?" Her voice dripped with venom. "She has brainwashed the child, manipulated a grieving 4-year-old for her own gain. This woman is dangerous, Franco." Franco looked at Lily's tear-stained face, at Aurora's trembling hands, at Margaret's triumphant smile barely concealed behind false concern. Pressure crushed him from all sides. Doubt poisoned his thoughts. Fear wrapped around his throat. He did what trapped animals do. He lashed out. "Get out!" The roar exploded from his chest. "Get out of my house! Now!" Aurora flinched as though struck. Gently, carefully, she pried Lily's fingers from her legs. The child screamed, reaching for her, but a maid appeared and scooped Lily up, carrying her away despite her thrashing. Aurora walked to the door. She opened it. Outside, rain poured from the black sky in sheets. Thunder rolled across Lake Michigan like the drums of war. She stepped through. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, cutting off Lily's screams mid-cry, sealing Aurora outside in the storm. No umbrella, no money, no home. She walked into the darkness, rain soaking through her thin uniform, with nowhere to go and nothing left to lose. The Castellano mansion collapsed 3 hours after Aurora walked into the storm. It began with a fever. Lily's temperature spiked to 104 degrees within an hour of the door closing. The medical team Franco had dismissed came rushing back, summoned by desperate phone calls. They found the child convulsing in her bed, her small body racked with tremors no medicine could explain. Then she stopped moving entirely. "Doctor?" Webb worked through the night, his aged hands checking vitals, adjusting IV lines, administering medications that seemed to do nothing. The monitors beeped their relentless warnings. Nurses whispered in corners, exchanging glances heavy with unspoken dread. By midnight, Lily lay unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored, her skin the color of old paper. Franco sat beside her bed, clutching her tiny hand in both of his. His fingers trembled so violently he could barely maintain his grip. The feared mafia boss had been reduced to a hollowed-out shell, watching his daughter slip away for the second time. "I don't understand it, Doctor," Webb admitted, his voice thick with exhaustion and confusion. "She was stable, improving, even. Then that woman left, and within hours." He shook his head. "It's as if her body simply gave up again." Franco did not respond. He could not. Lily's cracked lips moved, forming words too faint to hear. He leaned closer, pressing his ear near her mouth. "Aurora, Aurora, Mommy." The names repeated like a broken prayer, cycling through her fevered dreams. Even unconscious, even dying, his daughter called for the woman he had thrown into the rain. Margaret stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, face arranged in an expression of maternal concern. But Franco noticed something that pierced through his fog of grief. Her eyes did not match her face. Behind the furrowed brow and pursed lips, there was a flicker of something else, something bright and hard and satisfied. Triumph. The realization struck Franco like a fist to the stomach. Why wasn't Margaret truly upset? Her granddaughter was dying. Her only connection to her dead daughter was fading before her eyes. Yet beneath the performance of worry, Margaret Whitmore looked like a woman who had won. Franco released Lily's hand. He stood slowly, his joints aching, his body suddenly feeling every one of his 37 years. "Boss?" Vincent stepped forward from the shadows. "Where are you going?" Franco did not answer. He walked out of Lily's room, past the nurses, past the medical equipment, past the portraits of ancestors who had built their empire on blood and fear. His feet carried him down the east corridor, toward a door he had not opened since the day they buried his wife. Elena's study. He had locked it the morning after her funeral and thrown away the key. Everything inside remained exactly as she had left it, her books, her photographs, her secrets. Franco stood before the door, his hand hovering over the brass handle. His fingers trembled. He knew that if he opened this door, he would have to face everything he had been running from. The grief, the guilt, the truth about the woman he had just cast into the storm. And perhaps if Elena had left any trace of herself behind the answers he desperately needed. His hand closed around the handle. The door swung open, and the ghost of Elena Castellano breathed across Franco's face. Her perfume still lingered faint, almost imaginary, but unmistakable. The scent of gardenias and vanilla that had once meant home, love, safety. Now it meant loss. Franco stepped into the study like a man entering a tomb. Nothing had been touched since the day she died. Her books lined the shelves in the same careful arrangement. Her paintbrushes stood in a ceramic jar on the desk, bristles stiff with dried color. Family photographs smiled from silver frames, Elena holding newborn Lily, Elena on their wedding day, Elena laughing in the summer sun. Franco ran his fingers across the spines of her books. Disturbing dust that had accumulated like snow. He did not know what he was looking for. He only knew he needed something of hers, some piece of Elena that might guide him through this darkness. His hand stopped on a small wooden box tucked behind a row of poetry collections. He pulled it free and set it on the desk. The hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of letters, bound with a faded ribbon. Franco's heart stuttered. He untied the ribbon and spread the letters across the desk. Most were addressed to Elena from various friends and family members. But one envelope caught his attention, a letter Elena had written but never sent. The address read, Aurora Hayes, Southside, Chicago. Franco's blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, he unfolded the paper. Elena's handwriting flowed across the page, achingly familiar, as if she were speaking to him from beyond the grave. My dearest cousin Aurora, I know you are going through hell right now. I wish I could do more to help. But Franco, he doesn't understand. He thinks money can solve everything. He doesn't know that some wounds need love, not cash. I have been cooking Grandma's chicken soup for Lily. Do you remember the recipe? Star-shaped pasta, fresh mint, simmered low and slow. Lily is addicted to it now. Whenever she gets sick, it's the only thing she'll eat. Nothing else works. Aurora, if anything ever happens to me, please find Lily. You are the only person I trust to love her the way I do. The only one who understands where we come from, what matters. Franco has a good heart. It's just buried too deep. But you'll see it eventually. I promise. I love you, little cousin. I always will. Elena. The letter slipped from Franco's fingers. It floated to the floor like a dying leaf. Aurora was Elena's cousin, her family. The woman Elena trusted above all others to care for their daughter, and Franco had thrown her into the storm. The truth crashed over him like a wave breaking against rocks. The soup, the lullabies, the instant connection between Aurora and Lily. It was all because they shared blood, shared history, shared a grandmother who taught them both to cook with love. Franco had not hired a stranger that morning. Fate had delivered his wife's dying wish to his doorstep, and he had cast her out like garbage. A roar tore from his throat. Vincent! The door burst open. His right-hand man appeared, eyes wide with alarm. Franco was already on his feet, crossing the room in 3 strides. Find her. Find Aurora. Now. Franco burst through the mansion's front door into the raging storm. Rain lashed his face like frozen needles. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground beneath his feet. He did not stop for a coat. He did not stop for anything. Vincent sprinted after him, shouting over the howling wind. Boss, let me drive. You can't go out there alone. Franco ignored him. He ran toward the garage, his leather shoes slipping on the wet gravel, his $1,000 suit already soaked through. His phone was pressed to his ear before he reached the car. Mrs. Crawford, the personnel file for Aurora Hayes. I need her home address. Now. He listened, memorized, hung up. Vincent caught up to him as Franco threw himself into the driver's seat of a black SUV. The engine roared to life. Vincent barely made it into the passenger side before Franco floored the accelerator, sending the vehicle screaming down the driveway. They drove through the storm like men possessed. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. Lightning illuminated the empty streets in brief, blinding flashes. Franco gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, pushing the vehicle through flooded intersections that would have stopped any sane driver. Southside. The neighborhood transformed as they crossed invisible boundaries. The elegant brownstones of the north gave way to crumbling tenements. Streetlights flickered or stood dark, Potholes became craters. Then the road disappeared entirely. A river of muddy water stretched across the street, too deep and too treacherous to pass. Franco slammed the brakes. "We'll have to go around," Vincent began. Franco was already out of the car. He plunged into the floodwater without hesitation, wading through knee-deep muck that sucked at his Italian leather shoes. Rain plastered his hair to his skull. Mud splattered his ruined suit. He did not care. He ran through the flooded streets, pounding on doors, shouting at startled faces that peered through rain-streaked windows. "Aurora Hayes! Do you know Aurora Hayes? Where does she live?" Confused shrugs, slammed doors, suspicious eyes. Finally, an elderly woman wrapped in a threadbare shawl cracked her door open. The girl with the sick grandmother? She squinted at Franco at his expensive clothes now destroyed by mud, at the desperation carved into his face. "She got evicted last week. Landlord threw her out. Someone said she went to the old church at the end of the block, the abandoned one." Franco ran. The church loomed at the end of a dead-end street, a crumbling Gothic structure with boarded windows and a collapsed roof. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Franco pushed through. Inside, the darkness was absolute. Rain drummed against what remained of the ceiling, leaking through 100 holes. Broken pews lay scattered like fallen soldiers, and in the corner, huddled against the altar, sat a figure, Aurora. She was soaked to the bone, shivering violently, her thin uniform offering no protection against the cold. In her arms, she clutched something to her chest, a worn photograph, protected from the rain by her curved body. Two little girls smiling in the sunshine. Franco crossed the ruined church and dropped to his knees before her. The muddy water soaked through his pants, but he did not notice. "Aurora." His voice broke on her name. "I know. I found Elena's letter. I know who you are." Aurora raised her head slowly. Her eyes were red and swollen, empty of everything except exhaustion and pain. "What do you know?" Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "That I'm a thief? Or that I'm the poor cousin Elena had to hide from you, because you would have looked at me exactly the way you did that first day?" Franco lowered his head. "I know I'm not worthy of forgiveness," he whispered, "but Lily is dying. She's calling your name. Please," his voice cracked, "please come back. She needs you." Aurora stared at the man kneeling before her, the mafia boss of South Chicago, brought to his knees in the mud of her childhood neighborhood, rain and tears streaming down his face, indistinguishable from each other. She said nothing for a long moment. In her mind, Elena's voice whispered across the years, "Franco has a good heart. It's just buried too deep." She thought of Lily, the small hand reaching for her, the cracked lips forming the word mommy. Aurora closed her eyes. "I'm not coming back for you," she said finally. Her voice was steady despite the cold eating into her bones. "I'm coming back for Lily, for the promise I made to Elena." Franco nodded, his head still bowed. "I understand." He rose and extended his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, Aurora took it. They drove back through the storm in silence. The rain began to ease as they crossed into the wealthy northern neighborhoods, as if even the weather recognized the invisible boundaries of class. The mansion's lights blazed against the pre-dawn darkness when they arrived. It was 4 a.m. Aurora did not wait for the car to fully stop. She threw open the door and ran inside, past startled servants, up the grand staircase, down the east corridor to Lily's room. The child lay motionless in her bed, surrounded by beeping machines and anxious nurses. Her skin was pale as snow, her breathing shallow and irregular. Aurora crossed the room in 3 strides. She climbed onto the bed, gathering Lily's fragile body into her arms, pressing the child against her chest. And she began to sing. The old lullaby flowed from her lips, the same melody her grandmother had taught her and Elena decades ago. The same song that carried the scent of chicken soup and star-shaped pasta and love that cost nothing but meant everything. Lily stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, her small fingers twitched, then curled around Aurora's arm. "Aurora," the whisper was barely audible. "You came back." Aurora pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, tears streaming freely now. "I'll never leave again, baby. Never." Franco stood in the doorway, watching the 2 figures on the bed, his daughter and her cousin, the family Elena had tried to give him all along, the family he had been too blind to see. Morning came gray and quiet. Franco summoned Margaret to the study. She arrived with her usual air of superiority, expecting vindication. Instead, she found Elena's letter waiting on the desk. Her face drained of color as she read it. "Get out of my house," Franco said. His voice carried no anger, only cold, absolute finality. "Never come back." Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but Vincent appeared at her elbow, his hand firm on her arm. "This way, Mrs. Whitmore." She was escorted to her car without ceremony. The gates closed behind her with a definitive clang. Inside the mansion, silence settled over the halls. But for the first time in 23 days, it was not the silence of grief. It was peace. 6 months later, spring had come to Chicago. Tulips bloomed in the Castellano gardens, red, yellow, purple, a riot of color, where gray death had once reigned. The mansion no longer resembled a mausoleum. Sunlight poured through open curtains. Fresh flowers filled every room. And most importantly, laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence and sorrow. Lily ran across the garden lawn, her rosy cheeks flushed with joy, her dark hair streaming behind her like a banner of life reclaimed. She chased a butterfly, her giggles rising into the spring air like music. Inside the kitchen, Aurora stood at the stove, stirring a familiar pot. She no longer wore the navy blue maid's uniform. Instead, a simple floral dress draped her figure, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. The yellow rubber gloves were gone forever. She hummed the old lullaby as she cooked, adding star-shaped pasta to the simmering broth. Footsteps approached from behind. Strong arms wrapped around her waist. Franco rested his chin on her shoulder, breathing in the scent of mint and chicken and home. "What's special about today's soup?" he murmured against her ear. Aurora smiled, a secret playing at the corners of her lips. "There's an extra star in it today, for a new family member." Franco froze. Aurora turned in his arms, taking his hand and placing it gently on her belly, where a small, barely visible curve had begun to form. "Lily is going to have a little brother or sister." Franco, the mafia boss who had once ordered executions without flinching, felt tears spill down his cheeks. But these were not tears of grief or rage or desperation. These were tears of pure, unbridled joy. Before he could speak, the kitchen door burst open. "Daddy! Aurora! Look what I caught!" Lily ran in, cupping her hands carefully around something precious. She opened her palms to reveal a delicate butterfly, its wings painted orange and black. "It landed right on my finger, like magic." Franco lifted his daughter into his arms, pulling Aurora close with the other. The three of them stood together in the sunny kitchen, a family forged not by blood alone, but by love, by loss, by second chances. On the counter nearby, a silver-framed photograph watched over the scene. Elena smiled from behind the glass, her eyes warm, her expression peaceful, as if she had known all along, as if she had planned this from the very beginning. This story reminds us that love cannot be bought with money or power. The most expensive doctors and the finest chefs could not save Lily, but a simple pot of soup made with love brought her back to life. Sometimes the greatest miracles come from the humblest places. Family is not always defined by blood. Aurora and Lily shared a bond deeper than genetics, a bond built on compassion, sacrifice, and the courage to love despite the risk of loss. And redemption is always possible. Franco buried his heart beneath layers of pride and pain, but when he finally knelt in the mud and asked for forgiveness, he discovered that it's never too late to change. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another video. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. We would love to know what comfort food from your grandmother or mother has the power to heal your soul. For the Castellano family, it was chicken soup with star-shaped pasta. What is it for you? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We read every single message, and your stories inspire us to keep creating content that connects us all. Thank you for watching. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you always find your own star, even in the darkest nights. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.